fear, faith, and the hunt for the unholy. For over 300 years, tens of thousands of people, mostly women, were accused, tortured, and executed as witches. The witch trials were not just legal proceedings. They were a powerful expression of fear, religious dogma, misogyny, and political control. Understanding their history means confronting one of the darkest chapters in Western legal and cultural history.
What?
Origins of witch belief. The idea of witches, humans with supernatural, harmful powers, goes back thousands of years. But for much of early history, accusations of witchcraft were localized, personal, and often tied to folklore. It wasn't until Christian Europe began blending biblical fears with pagan superstitions that the concept of a global conspiracy of witches took root. The Bible, particularly verses like Exodus 22:18, was used to justify executions. Witchcraft became associated with devil worship, not just superstition. The church promoted the idea that witches were in league with Satan to undermine Christianity. By the late Middle Ages, witchcraft was no longer just folklore. It was considered heresy and treason. A key catalyst was the publication of a book in 1487 called the Malleus Maleficarum, written by two Dominican inquisitors. It became the manual for identifying, prosecuting, and killing witches. 2. The witch craze begins. The first large-scale witch trials began in the 15th century, driven by both church and state. Key features of the witch craze. Torture was routinely used to extract confessions. Accusations often started from personal disputes, jealousy, or unexplained illnesses. Women, especially poor, unmarried, or elderly women, were the most frequent targets. Spectral evidence was sometimes accepted as proof. In parts of Germany, France, Switzerland, and Scotland, trials turned into mass panics. Whole communities were devastated. The trials were fueled by economic tension, disease, social change, and deep religious division during the Reformation and Counter-Reformation. 3. Peak of the European witch hunts between 1500 and 1700. Estimates suggest that 40,000 to 60,000 people were executed for witchcraft in Europe. Millions more were accused, interrogated, or imprisoned. In 1692, sparked by a group of young girls who claimed to be afflicted by witchcraft. The panic escalated quickly. Germany saw some of the worst purges, including the Würzburg and Bamberg trials, where entire towns were consumed by hysteria. Scotland executed more witches per capita than any other country in Europe. England had more restrained trials, but still executed hundreds, especially during the Civil War period. Most accused witches were women, but men and even children were also charged. But they were far from unique. 4. Witch trials in colonial America. The Salem case, the most infamous witch trials in American history, occurred in Salem, Massachusetts. Over 200 people were accused, including prominent community members. 20 were executed, 19 by hanging, and one man crushed to death with stones. The trials relied on spectral evidence and coerced confessions. In Scotland, the last execution occurred in 1727. Other countries followed suit. Eventually, public skepticism and political pressure brought the trials to an end. The Salem Witch Trials stand out as a particularly dramatic example of mass hysteria, the dangers of theocracy, and flawed legal systems. 5. Decline and end of witch trials by the early 18th century. Belief in witches had begun to wane across Europe and America. Several factors led to the decline. The Enlightenment encouraged reason and scientific thinking. Legal reforms demanded better evidence and due process. Prominent intellectuals and even some clergy began to criticize the cruelty and logic of the trials. Scandals and abuses like false confessions and corruption undermined public trust. Many women and children are still persecuted, even killed, based on accusations of supernatural harm. By the late 1700s, most European governments had formally ended witch trials. In 1736, England repealed its witchcraft laws. 6. The legacy of the witch trials. When institutions fail the people they serve, and when society turns its back on the vulnerable. By studying these dark chapters, we learn how easily systems can turn oppressive and why vigilance, fairness, and compassion are essential in any age. The witch trials are not just an eerie piece of history. They left a lasting mark. They exposed the dangers of mass hysteria, religious extremism, and corrupt justice. They reinforce deep gender biases linking femininity with suspicion, weakness, and danger. They pave the way for better legal protections, including the rights to a fair trial and against torture. In modern times, the witch trials have become powerful metaphors for scapegoating, witch hunts, and moral panic. In recent years, several governments and churches have issued apologies or symbolic pardons for victims of witch trials. 7. Are witch hunts really over? While the historical witch trials are long over in the West, accusations of witchcraft still occur today, especially in parts of Africa, India, Papua New Guinea, and other regions where traditional beliefs mix with modern crises. Conclusion: lessons in fear and power. The history of witch trials is ultimately a history of what happens when fear overrides reason